What's up guys, Todd Kelly, Shuswap Outdoors. Today we're going to be doing a full service on this Honda 50 horsepower motor. We're going to change the oil and filter, we're going to check the spark plugs, change the gear oil, pull the prop, grease the shaft, and check the fuel filter. We'll start this off by going over the tools that you're going to need to get this job done. So the tools and supplies you're going to need, first off, you're going to need a 10W30 marine oil. That's what the Hondas use. I'm not brand specific at all, whatever's cheap. I change the oil twice a year, so I'm not super picky. Gear oil, I like the Honda Outboard gear oil. It's an 80W90, seems to work well. Comes with a pump. The oil filter from Honda, I'll put the specific number up. The 40 horse is the same as the 50. You only need to do the oil filter every second oil change. So if you do this once a year, you can do 2 oil changes. I also have a grease gun that has marine grade grease in it that we'll use for greasing the shaft and greasing the prop shaft. For the tools, you'll need an 18mm socket for the spark plugs, wide blade flathead screwdriver for some of the screws, a 12mm box end wrench for removing the oil drain plug, pair of side cutters for removing the cotter pin in the prop, and you'll need a tool to get the oil filter out. I just use a pair of channel locks. You'll also need a container for dumping the oil into, which I got a drain pan there. So we'll start off by changing the oil. The best thing to do when you're doing an oil change is to get the motor up to an operating temperature. That way the oil will flow out nice and you'll get all the gunk and grime out of the motor. The Hondas don't work well with the water earmuffs. You have to fill up a bucket, submerge the intake to run it. So I've already done that outside, ran it for about 5 minutes. It's up to operating temperature, so we'll get the oil out of this thing. So when I'm changing the oil, I always like removing the oil fill cap. That way you can get air through the system. You don't get a little bit of a vacuum when you're draining your oil out. Take that off, put it inside. The next step in switching out the oil is use your screwdriver, remove this cover. And they have this set up as a little bit of a pour spout to help direct the oil. This is a little bit messy. Good to have a sheet or some cardboard down on the ground because it doesn't matter what you do, the oil is going to get everywhere on this thing. Our 12mm wrench. And remove the oil drain plug. We let the oil drain out over about 5-10 minutes, make sure we get everything out. The oil drain plug here does have a washer, so make sure that you get that back on. Sometimes it does get stuck up underneath here. So we'll reinstall this. Make sure you do everything by hand. A lot of these parts are aluminum, so it's really easy to cross thread stuff, which you don't want to do. We'll get our 12mm box end wrench here. Snug it up, it doesn't need to be super tight. The last step is to replace the oil drain cover. There is a metal sleeve that goes inside of this, so make sure that it doesn't fall out. That's to prevent that you don't squish and break the plastic. Reinstall the screw. And once again, just snug. Doesn't need to be super tight. Next step is to take out the oil filter. This can make a bit of a mess. I like tilting the motor up and putting it on its side just to help get any oil that still might be in the filter to stay in the motor and not spill out. Good to clean up the seal. Get all the oil out. Get a rag and clean everything out. Make sure that we don't have anything stuck around the seal that could prevent us getting a proper seal from the new oil filter. And install our new oil filter here. And once again, you just want this snug, you don't want it super tight. And that's the oil filter. Next step is to add engine oil. We'll add the engine oil. The specs say 2 liters. If you don't change the oil filter, 2.1 liters if you change the oil filter. The next thing we'll do is do the spark plugs. I like doing one at a time, starting from the top to bottom. Remove the spark plug cable. And this is our 18 millimeter socket. And we will check and clean the spark plugs, see how they are, see if we need to replace them or not. So I just clean up the spark plugs on a wire brush, get some of the debris off them, clean them up. I changed them last year, so they look pretty good. Next thing you want to do with the spark plugs is check the gap. Just a spark plug gap tool here. The gap you're looking for on the Honda 50, the Honda 40 is 0.24 to 0.28, and you just use it, measurement, and make sure that your gap is good here. See if we can focus in and just check it on this. It's at the 0.28 side of things, so it is good. I could tighten it up a little bit, but I'll just leave it alone, and we'll move on to the next 2 spark plugs. So the second spark plug looked good as well, cleaned it up, checked the gap, reinstall it by hand here. And snug it up. Pull out this last one. So when I'm cleaning the plugs up, just a wire brush here. Just scrape off all that carbon. Clean up the threads. And we'll have a good look at all the edges. We want to make sure that everything's square on the contacts and nothing's rounded over. If they're rounded over, or if you have major discoloration, that's when you want to change your plugs. Changing them every second year is also a good idea. Like I said, I did these ones last year, so they'll be good for this year as well. And we'll check the gap. And the gap is about 0.26, 0.27. We'll just tighten that up a tiny little bit here. You don't want to bend these too much. So we're at 0.26. Oh, we're still on manual. So I hope you guys can see here 0.26, 0.27, right in that range. And we'll go ahead and reinstall this. Reinstall the last plug. Snug it up. Reinstall the spark plug wire. And we'll move on to the gear oil. We're going to do the gear oil next. There's two screws. There's your drain and fill screw down at the bottom here, and your oil level screw up here at the top. This is where you want a wide blade flathead screwdriver. Make sure that you don't strip these screws out. I like to start with the top oil level screw. We'll undo this one, and there is a little rubber O-ring, so make sure that you don't lose that. We'll set that there. We got our oil pan underneath. We'll undo the bottom screw and drain the gear oil. This actually looks pretty clean. And we'll let that run for 10 minutes or so to make sure we get all the gear oil out. While you're waiting for your gear oil to drain out, there's a couple things you want to look for here. First off, you want to see if there's any metal shavings in the gear oil coming out. Some outboards, the drain screw has a little magnet on it, which this one does from Honda, and you can check it for any metal shavings. There's no metal shavings, everything's good there. Next thing you want to look for is the color of your gear oil. If it is milky or cloudy, that would indicate that you're getting water into your gear case, which isn't good. The next thing you want to do is smell your gear oil. If it smells really burnt, that is also an indication that you're getting some excess of heat buildup and wear in your gear case. So we're going to keep letting this drain out. It's going to take probably 10 minutes or so for it all to come out. And we'll hook up our gear oil pump, which you can buy. This comes with a bunch of different fittings here. This is the Honda specific one, works on all the Honda outboard motors. There's different tips for different thread pitches for the different outboards. You install this in your oil drain / fill hole, and you pump gear oil in until it starts coming out the oil level hole. You want to make sure that your motor is level, so you're getting the right amount of gear oil into your gear case. We've got the gear oil drained out enough, so we'll screw in the oil pump. and fill the gear case full of oil. There we go. So once we get oil coming out of the oil level hole, we can reinstall the screw, and we reinstall the top one first, so we create a bit of a vacuum when we remove the pump, that all the oil doesn't start coming out right away. Remove the pump fitting. And we'll reinstall the drain screw. Just be careful not to cross thread this. And tighten that up. So our next step here is to remove the prop and grease the shaft. Even if you never switch out your prop ever, it's a good idea to do this at least once a year to prevent it from getting seized on. If you ever ended up damaging your prop, or you did decide to switch your prop, you're going to be able to get it off a lot easier if you do this once a year. So the first step is we're going to remove the cotter pin with our side cutters. Get that out. Once we get the cotter pin out, we need to remove the castle nut. This is a 7/8 socket here. The Hondas, they're not very tight. The nut does not keep the prop on by a pressure fit. The nut only keeps the prop from coming off. We will remove the castle nut. Put that to the side. There's two washers here. There's a washer, a spacer, and we can remove the prop. And because I do this once a year, it comes off really easy, nice, simple to do. There is another spacer washer here, and we're going to clean everything off with a rag and a little bit of white gas here. With everything reassembled here, we'll add some marine grease to the shaft, and we'll reassemble the prop. This first washer spacer will get grease on it. Reassemble that, put that on. Spread grease all over everything. Put a little bit more on. Put the prop back on. like to put a little more grease on here. So this first spacer goes on. Lots of grease around it. The washer. Reinstall that. We'll clean off our castle nut here. Thread on our castle nut. And this does not need to be tight at all. We're just snugging it up so we can line up the first hole with, so we can get our cotter pin in. This cotter pin is in really good shape. It's a nice stainless cotter pin that I have. So I'm going to reuse it. Line it up, bend it over. Flatten it out, there we go. I'll have to get a little bit of white gas and some on a rag here to clean everything up. Get a bit of a greasy mess here. But that's how you do your prop. Next thing we're going to do here on the port side of the motor is your shaft. There's 2 grease nipples. And we'll add some grease to it. You don't have to do a ton. Add a little bit of grease. And we'll clean up the excess off. So the last thing we're going to look at here is the first stage fuel filter. This is a water separator. It prevents water from getting into the motor. So if you end up with water in your fuel, this will screen it out. And in the bottom here, there's a little float. It's a red float. If it's up at all, that means it's floating on water and that you're getting water into your fuel system. This one is on the bottom here. I don't have a problem, so we're going to leave it alone. When I fill up my boat, I use a fuel filter to fill up into the tank. I put an extra inline fuel filter in the system before it reaches the motor. I did have an issue running ethanol once into a crappy fuel line, ate the plastic and clogged up the last stage fuel filter, which is in here, and we had to take it to the shop for them to figure out what was wrong, and it ended up being clogged up with the little tiny little pieces of plastic from the fuel line. So that's a good reminder not to run any fuel with ethanol in it. It will damage your system. So since then I'm only running premium all the time with no ethanol. So if you want to change this fuel filter, if you do notice that this float is floating, it comes out You unscrew it, it's full of fuel, and that little screen here is what you change out, and that's your water separator. Screw that back on. We can reinstall it. And that's your fuel system. The other fuel filters, unless you're mechanically inclined, I would leave alone and get a shop to change them out. There's parts that you need to take out to get the job done. This one's the easiest one to do. I really recommend using a fuel funnel filter when you're filling up your boat. That will eliminate a lot of your problems, and you won't have to worry about the fuel filters that are actually in the motor. They'll last a really, really long time. Anyways, that's how you service an outboard motor, specifically the 50 horse Honda here. Most other outboards will be very similar. If you have any questions or comments, throw those on down below. I always check the comment section. I'll be sure to answer your questions the best I can. Please hit the thumbs up. That really helps the video. And if you're into more hunting, fishing, gear review content, please subscribe. Anyways, thanks for watching.